Hello, everyone. My name is Diaz. I'm a founding director at the Constellation Center for Equity and Computing at Georgia Tech. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of Voices for Social Justice. That's voices of innovative and compassionate experts in society. And through Voices, through this podcast, our center is building an alliance of forward-thinking and transformational experts who can help us navigate through some much needed conversations about education in America and how we're handling the student and teacher needs during this pandemic. We've also had conversations about race and racism in America and the effects of, some biased policies that serve as barriers for minoritized groups such as women and girls and people of color to advance in STEM and computing education. We've been in crisis mode, I feel like, due to this pandemic for about a year now, and the crisis of inequality and inequity is only exacerbated by COVID-19, but I have high hopes, though, that the CSA community, that we can rally together. I believe CS education can be part of the solution, not only to recover from this pandemic, but to also pave the way for breaking barriers that will help all our kids and teachers succeed. And fortunately for us today, we have a very special guest on this episode. We want to welcome Jake Baskin, Executive Director for the Computer Science Teachers Association, otherwise known as CSTA. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you, Jake. Welcome to this episode.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Lynn, and I really look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so, Jake, I've known you for a very long time now, and, I wanted to start out with a question because I know you've been a former classroom teacher, so have I. And so I just wanted to start out with a question about, teaching in today's world. I've heard from many friends, teachers, about what it's like for them to be teaching remotely and in person. Some have adjusted quite well, and others, honestly, have been, on the brink of exiting the field just because of all the stress and pressure. But one thing that I've noticed that is common among, all the conversations that I've had is they're really trying their best. The best that they can for their students. And I'm just wondering what you've heard, Jake, from teachers about what it's like and your thoughts on the current teaching situation in our schools today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you outlined and what you're hearing from teachers. I noticed incredibly early on in this school year, sort of August, September timeframe of 2020, honestly a shocking shift in the overall mood and energy of the incredible teachers and volunteers that we work with at CSTA. We at CSTA and we in the CS education community, I think, are so lucky to have really passionate teachers that are solutions oriented, that are always thinking about how to make something work for their students, no matter the barrier that's placed in front of them. And that means that they're an incredibly positive group to work with. And it was stunning. It was, moving to see how shaken this group has been in the face of the prolonged shift to virtual teaching, to the grind of everything that has come with COVID. And I think really the continued trend that has happened for years around how we push everything down to teachers. Systems of education push additional responsibility, additional risk, additional expectations onto teachers whenever anything breaks or goes wrong. And you can't just keep adding to that list. And it's been shocking to see how that's played out. I hope that we can use it as an opportunity to rethink the responsibilities we put on teachers and really open up a much bigger conversation about what teaching and learning should look like as we come out the other side of this pandemic. That's the optimist in me, but to be frank, I do see just really challenging environments that we've placed on classroom teachers regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I've often been asked, what would I do if I was in the classroom today? And honestly, I'm pretty sure that it would be very stressful. But I'm also an optimist like you, where it's about doing the best that you can for the students that you're serving, regardless of the barriers and challenges. And you're right, it's just something that teachers take on naturally, because you're a teacher. And whether it's fair or not, that's an entirely whole conversation that I think you're right. We need to have. But there are some things that I've experienced in the classroom that have kind of led me to where I am today. And it was in the classroom where I first truly, as an adult, experienced inequities and inequalities, because I saw it happening to my students. And so as a follow-up question, Jake, I wanted to ask, being a former teacher in Chicago public schools, what have you taken from your time in the classroom to do the work you do now? Because you're the executive director for, a teachers association. What are some of the experiences that you've had in the classroom that have led you, to where you are now and, serving teachers now?
Yeah, I think a lot about my personal experience in the classroom has motivated how I think about my work at CSTA and the support that we strive to provide for teachers in computer science. Uh, I tell this story a lot, so sorry if some listeners have heard it before, but I really go back to my first year in the classroom as a CS teacher. And I was really lucky in many ways. I was teaching at an incredible school, Lindblom Math and Science Academy here in Chicago. Swoop, swoop, go Eagles for everyone out there. But this was over 10 years ago now, and we had a principal who had a clear vision for why computer science should be a part of what that school did at a time when it wasn't popular to have that vision. And he would observe me and was really supportive in helping me create an engaging environment for students. But when it came to content or pedagogy related to CS specifically, it was just not in his wheelhouse. It wasn't his experience. And similarly, throughout the school, there wasn't anyone to turn to in the same way that math teachers or English teachers were able to get together and plan and create these sort of bonds and address the challenges that come with teaching. And it was through a lot of luck that I was connected to a newly formed Chicago CSTA chapter at the time that introduced me to a community that could provide that support. And so I think a lot about how isolating teaching can be, and teaching computer science especially can be, when I look at what we at CSTA can do and how we can really invest in and support our chapters as local communities, local departments, and organizations that create the space to connect with folks that are struggling with the same struggles that we are. I think that's essential for teachers. I think the other thing I try to come back to, and I value our membership and our incredible teacher board members who push me on this, is just never forgetting that feeling in the classroom. There's no joy like a lesson going well and engaged students that are really, feeling the energy and creating the energy in the room. Where I think about how much I loved watching freshman students, especially like the growth that could happen in that first year is just astonishing. Um, and and at the same time, the gut punch that comes with a lesson that doesn't go well, or running into the challenges that we see that are and that our students face that I mean, honestly, they're so much braver than I am now or ever was as a teenager in being able to take on challenges, address inequities in the classroom, and bring that back to the work we do, because that is what drives me. That's why I think teaching is so important, and why I so value the energy and heart that our members put into that work.
Yeah, I often, well, my friends or who are former teachers and current teachers are often kid with me, and they say, once a teacher, you're always a teacher. And another friend said, yeah, once a teacher, you're always grading papers, no matter what. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that part too.
Yep.
But I entirely agree with you about, doing things in the work that we do today to elevate the teaching profession. That is so important for this community to be able to do collectively, because, like you said, never forget the feelings of being in the classroom, because that work is just as important as many, many other professions that we value today. And so one of the things that the Constellation Center has focused on is, enhancing and improving on teacher professional development, really targeting, the needs of particularly new teachers who are new to teaching computer science, and also teachers who are really trying to diversify their student population, understanding the challenges and, the improvements that need to be made in computing and the tech workforce and STEM education, period. I'm wondering what you've done at CSTA to kind of, be a part of those efforts, not just to broaden participation, but really to increase success with teachers of color and students of color.
Yeah, I think there are a couple interesting sort of professional development avenues that we really focus on, and one that I want to highlight is the recently released, like a year old now, standards for CS teachers. An area that we have really focused on recently is thinking about what happens for a teacher after their first year in the computer science space. There's lots of incredible work, like work that you're doing, happening with new CS teachers. And I think we all also know that teaching is not something that happens over a year. It is a career-long craft that we're developing. And there were no really clear guidelines or resources to help teachers say, I want to grow. Where can I go to get a resource that will help me with increasing the CS content that I'm aware of, or increasing the sort of pedagogical approaches that I'm taking in the classroom, and really deepening approach. And so we see an incredible value and opportunity in creating those areas of support, in areas that are curriculum agnostic, that support teachers in beginning to build their own resources, or piece together things that are working across a number of platforms, and then connecting with other folks that are creating them as well, and trying to be a hub for teachers to find those resources. And
Can you
like you
talk a
said,
little bit about, like, sorry, with these teaching standards, what's like one or two things that stand out for you in these standards?
Yeah. So I think there are a few things that jump out to me. I think one that is so important for us to remember is that content is just a piece of the overall teaching practice package. And so often I will talk, especially with folks that are outside of education but want to support it, about how well we just need to teach teachers C++, and then the object-oriented programming, and this and this and this, and it is so separate from that content. And finding ways to center teachers as agents that disrupt inequity as part of their work, and also being able to outline, I think, ways that teachers can think about the design of instruction and the classroom practice, and how those pieces fit together.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it was like
No.
I wanted to hear from you your thoughts were, and then you were going to mention other things CSTA was doing for teachers.
Yeah, well, and I specifically wanted to sort of follow up on what you raised around the issues of equity and really addressing inequities that are plaguing the CS education space. And we very much believe that at a core of the work we do and the work we want to support teachers in doing is better understanding and exploring how we can act as disruptors to those inequities. So, like I just mentioned, they're centered as a key portion of the standards for CS teachers. But we also are really intentionally working to make sure we keep a focus on equitable teaching and specifically addressing racism in CS education as part of the national conversation in the ways that we can. So if you were able to attend last summer's CSTA conference, I hope that folks really took away that as a key message, and you should expect to continue hearing that because it's something that really is central to us. And I also want to highlight an incredible program that we launched 2 years ago now, and that, Lien, you're an advisor on, the CSTA Equity Fellowship, which is specifically a place to work with outstanding teachers that are actively doing this in their classroom and help them both be elevated into leadership positions in the CS education world and scale the work that they're doing to a broader teacher audience and really connecting in a peer-to-peer way. We're in our second cohort of fellows right now, and they're doing outstanding work thinking about ways to highlight what really works in the classroom. It's easy for me to sit here and talk about the theories about how we can start to address some of these systemic challenges, but what matters is what's really happening on the ground day to day, and it's important that I'm getting out of the way and finding space for teachers that are doing this every day to be recognized and to share that work.
Well, I do want to applaud you for putting that together because I'm so pleased to see how the program has grown, and quite honestly, it's because and you have a lot of other good people on the group of advisors too, but we did envision being the fellows to leverage the association in bringing together teachers who are really prioritizing equity in CS and elevating those conversations. And so, I believe that you all have done a really good job at being able to do that. And the selection, I believe, the selection of the fellows, it has been a phenomenal experience, I think. So kudos to you and your team for being able to do that. I think building on efforts and programs like that is really important, and I hope that continues. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to your work that you've done in terms of policy. You've done a little bit of that in your career. From your perspective, what are some significant gains that we've been able to do in terms of policy and expanding access to computer science? And what do you think we need to do more and better in terms of policy and CS education?
I love the way you framed that because so much has happened in CS education in the last 10 years that it is easy to forget or sort of overlook how much progress we've made from a policy perspective. I go back to being in the classroom 10 years ago, and from a systems perspective, from my school, my district, the state, there was no concept of standards for CS education. No one was thinking about how to certify a CS teacher. I was I was a very uniquely certified teacher to make things work. And the fact that in this time we've seen um, over 30 states adopt standards and clearly just outline that CS is an expected content area that students can learn about and what that looks like is outstanding. That we've seen policies around teacher certification pop up. And I think as that's grown, it's been incredibly impactful to see policies that now require that schools offer computer science and start to build that capacity. And it's essential, I think, and we're seeing this more and more places, that we combine that with rigorous data tracking to understand how that's playing out. So annually, we work with Code.org and ESEP to put out a state of CS policy report where we can dig into the impacts of these policies. And what we see is that way more students are taking computer science, which is great. But we still need to make some key shifts to change the inequities we see in the makeup of those students. We continue to see men dramatically overrepresented relative to young women in CS courses, and white students dramatically overrepresented, especially relative to Black and Latino students. And so thinking about how we can continue to push policy, it's essential that we keep equity at the forefront of evaluating the impact of those policies and thinking about what comes next.
Yeah, it's something that we've really tried to emphasize in, working with administrators and state leaders and, just key stakeholders, is to really consider the proportional representation, that exists and what's to aim for. Because, our state, I'm in Georgia, that the makeup of Georgia is probably slightly different than the makeup in Illinois. And, when you look at who is participating and who isn't participating, we want to first anchor the conversations in proportional representation. What should that look like? What does that look like? And how can we get there? And then in terms of equity and success is, what are the structures and policies that are in place to ensure that, that people who want to be in computer science, are also have the resources to be successful as well too. That's sort of maybe, the next level of conversations that need to be had.
I think, I hope I don't get myself in trouble here, but I think that we're really coming up to a crossroads or just a big question that CS education and CS education policy needs to struggle with and answer. And that is whether we'd be happy if in 10 years CS looked just like math does now. And I don't think there's agreement in our field around the answer to that question. And it would be good for us to start answering it. And I posed the question. I don't have an answer myself. I really struggle with what are the right incremental gains to focus on, and where do we need to completely rebuild the system. And sometimes it depends on how spunky I'm feeling to to answer that. But it's important that we start to struggle with it.
Yeah, and I mean, I like that you brought that up because, we're not going to solve all of the problems in just one episode of this podcast, but I think these are important questions to keep raising and to keep bringing to the table and bring, more people to the table into these conversations that can help us, navigate through those conversations. And that's what this is about. So I really appreciate you, keeping that at the forefront. Because it is going to take us still a little bit more time, to get there. And so, I just kind of want to maybe wrap up the conversation with a couple more questions for you, Jake, because I'm really curious to know too, what has been your best PD experience? And how what are some things that we might be able to do collectively, maybe with different organizations to really maximize positive experiences for teachers in terms of PD?
That is a big question. So as a teacher, by far, that I can answer easily. My best PD experience was exploring computer science, and the second time I went through it, and all of a sudden things started to click and fall into place in a way that they couldn't have it. And I really take away the importance of having both being able to directly practice what I was going to be doing in my classroom during the professional learning, and um, uh, and having that immediate opportunity to implement it. It was something I was going to do later that month that I was practicing, and that I was getting to see other people practice and learn from in that way. Um, so I think about that a lot as we work to structure professional learning. Um, and then the second answer, this is half thought out, but I'm thinking about it because a little over a year ago I was looking for future CSTA conference locations, and through that, this is maybe a little secret to places we're considering down the line, but had the opportunity to visit Disneyland, and I was just thinking, well, there about how everything is structured to sort of provide these opportunities of wonder and joy, and how can we do those same things for teachers, and how can we sort of restructure some of our expectations around professional growth in a much more joy-oriented environment. It's so often created around compliance, and that sets everyone in a mindset that is not about growth. And so I haven't figured out how to make that happen yet, but it is something that I really think about as we think towards inspiration for future work.
Well, I think that's, future conversations that we need to plan for. I think that's great. I think that's great that you've been thinking about it in that way. So our last question that we typically ask all our guests is, because our show is, called Voices, we like to hear from our guests what different voices or a voice that has been an inspiration for you, a voice or voices that guide you in the work that you do today or have led you to become the person you are today.
Yeah, this thinking about answering this question sort of brought I don't know, flood of emotion or thoughts as I sort of reflect on different inflection points in my career. And so I tied to my last answer and the power of the ECS curriculum. I have to say that Gail Chapman has been really an inspiration, and provided a path for me in teaching that was very different from the one that I was on before meeting her and interacting with ECS, and just had an incredibly positive impact on how I built relationships with students, how I created a classroom, and how I think about learning. And so a huge shout out to her and the work that she's done. And then I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Lynn, but I'm gonna say you as well. And I really think as I came into my current role, and it really has forced me to think about the importance of prioritization and understanding what work needs to be prioritized. And I've been really inspired by your ability to ensure that addressing equity in computer science stays a priority. And at times when it is easy, when I shouldn't say easy, when momentum is heading the other direction, you've done work to bring the community back. And I really try to remember that and think about how we can do the same at CSTA.
Well, I really appreciate that, Jake. You didn't have to say that, but thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I am going to have to agree with you on, Gail's impact in this community has been profound. Decades of her work and life has been dedicated to really bringing us along to where we are today. So I'm 100% with you on that as well, too. And thank you for your kind words. But you are our guest today, Jake, so the spotlight is on you. And I just really want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us today on this episode. You bring so much value and experience to this space, Jake, not just, as the current executive director of CSTA, but, your love of teaching, your passion for doing the right thing is very admirable. So, we are honored to have you as our guest today. And I just want to let everybody know that you can catch this podcast on our YouTube channel, or we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Deezer, we're on pretty much, all of the podcasts that you can think about. So don't miss this episode. And once again, Jake, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation with you today.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me. It was really wonderful to get to have this chat.